حي على الفلاح.
The breeze of the southern sea greeted with comforting feel on his cheek, his gaze staring far into the ocean across the invisible. His hand grasped the sword blade, but his spell that had gone far, defeating the falsehood, was not able to cast a bit of joy in his heart. His heart is restless and glum. His eyes were up to the sky. O Allah, if not for the ocean that prevents me, I will prepare my armed forces to spread the great sentence of your Shahadah. I will advance in order to uphold the Shari'ah of Islam in the Western Kingdom. I will unite all the empires under this noble banner. I will fight against the defamatory falsehoods to receive the holy message of you, O Allah. Uqbah Ibn Nafi radiallahu anh stared back at his army. Then he got up from his moody service, reset his steps towards his army. His heart ticked. If the vast ocean cannot weaken me, there is still a world that has not yet received the beauty of this noble teaching. Come on, we continue our struggle. Starting from the coast of Tangier in the Atlantic Ocean, Uqbah Ibn Nafi and his troops are on their way to the south, armed with the mandate of the Caliph Muawiyah. They have mastered all of North Africa, from Qayrawan in Tunisia to Fizan, and eventually to the city of El-Zab and Tahrat. The evolving nature of the soul of Uqbah ibn Nafi can be seen clearly, in which he never quotes in a moment of tiredness and contentment as he sees the success of his troops dominating the northern cities of Africa. But he feels more sad that he cannot afford to cross the ocean to enforce the word of Allah, armed with the Quranic verses of Surah Al-Fatiha in verse 2, Praise be to Allah, Lord of the worlds. He was unafraid in his heart to think that there was still a group of people who did not glorify Allah. His soul burns to make sure his life will release the bonds of humanity in this world towards a God other than Allah. Uqbah ibn Nafi radiallahu anh is not only known as a commander or a general who is able to force his troops to rally the ranks of the enemy, but he is also known as fair amateurs capable of governing a kingdom. The city of Qayrawan was founded and became the center of Islamic governance in North Africa under the leadership of Uqbah ibn Nafi. Uqbah ibn Nafi radiallahu anh was born in Mecca 1 year before the hijrah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. His father, Nafi bin Qais al-Fahri of Quraysh, had already embraced Islam. Thus, Uqbah ibn Nafi radiallahu anh was brought up in a Muslim environment. His descendants would be known as the Uqbids or Fihrids. He was closely related to Amr ibn al-As through his mother's side. He accompanied his father Nafi during the campaign of Amr ibn al-As in Egypt. After the conquest of Egypt, Amr sent him to conquer the west. In 50 Hijrah, now serving the Umayyad dynasty, in Muawiyah and Yazid's period, he began the Islamic conquest of the Maghreb, including present-day Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, and Morocco in North Africa. Uqba is the founder of the cultural city of Qayrawan in Tunisia. Uqba accompanied Al-As in his initial raids and capture of cities in North Africa, starting with Barca, then proceeding to Tripolitania in 644 AD. In 670, now the emir or commander, Uqba led an Arab army to North Africa, crossing the Egyptian deserts and setting up military posts at regular intervals along his route. In a region of what is now Tunisia, he established the town now called Qayrawan. Qayrawan meaning camp or caravanserai, about 160 kilometers south of present-day Tunis, which he used as a base for further operations. In the town of Qayrawan, there are also interesting stories mentioned about him. It is narrated that he once prayed that, O Allah, let us be safe from all beasts and dangers. At that time, Qayrawan was known as a place full of wild and toxic beasts like tigers and snakes. After he had prayed, locals saw many of the animals migrating elsewhere. This caused them to be drawn between the factors that caused them to embrace Islam. In addition, he also prayed to Allah to prosper Qayrawan and make it one of the centers of Islam. So far, this city, Qayrawan, is well known as one of the most valuable cities of Islamic heritage, as well as being the leading center of Islamic spread in northern Africa. Old chronicles describe Qayrawan as completely deserted, covered with impenetrable thickets, and being distant from trade routes, apparently inhospitable as a long-term settlement site. Why then did this temporary military camp soon become the greatest Muslim city in North Africa and the fourth holiest city of Islam after Mecca, Medina, and Jerusalem? Here we find mention of an incident that occurred during the initial encampment of Uqbah ibn Nafi, an incident which, because of its miraculous nature, most history books have chosen to ignore. The legend tells of a warrior's horse that stumbled on a golden goblet buried in the sands. The goblet was recognized as one that had mysteriously disappeared from Mecca some years before. When the goblet was dug from the desert sand, a spring miraculously appeared, and the waters of this spring were said to issue from the same source that supplies the sacred Zamzam well in Mecca. The power of these three miracles, the mysteriously lost and then found Meccan goblet, the miraculous gushing forth of the spring, and the source of that spring exercised a magnetic effect upon the early North African Muslims and thereby established the site of Qayrawan as a pilgrimage destination for ages to come. By 698, following several more military campaigns in the Maghreb, the Arabs had driven the Byzantines from their garrisons in Carthage and become masters of the provinces of North Africa, called by them Ifriqiya. The town of Qayrawan became the capital of this vast province. Governors were appointed to the province by the Umayyad and Abbasid caliphs, ruling from Damascus and Baghdad, and they exercised the rule from Qayrawan. Uqbah ibn Nafi radiallahu an was deposed by Muawiyah in 55 AH. He gladly accepted the order and passed the command to Abu Muhajir Dinar, who later reached victoriously up to Tanja, whose Berber ruler, Qusayla, accepted Islam. Uqbah bin Nafi radiallahu anh was again designated as commander of Maghreb in 62 AH. He marched westward and reached up to Tahirt, where a large Roman army confronted them. Muslims were small in number and away from their supply base. But Uqbah bin Nafi gave a great inspiring speech to his fighters, which energized them, and they fought furiously, defeating the rival force. Later, Uqbah bin Nafi marched triumphantly up to Sos and then to the seacoast. He galloped his horse into Atlantic Ocean and, according to another source, said the words which are recorded on the forehead of Islamic history that, O Lord, be thou witness that I have taken thy message up to the end of the land, and if this ocean were not in my way, I would have proceeded to fight the pagans until none would be worshipped except thee. After this grand victory, Uqbah bin Nafi returned toward his base in Qayrawan. When he reached Tanja, he dispersed his force and kept a small contingent of about 300 fighters with him. The enemy found an opportunity. Berber chief Qusayla, who had embraced Islam, turned away and joined the Romans with his force. Thus, a large enemy force attacked the Muslim contingent. Uqbah bin Nafi radiallahu an told Abu Muhajir Dinar to proceed to Qayrawan and take the command. Uqbah bin Nafi radiallahu an said, I desire a martyrdom for me. Abu Muhajir replied, I also desire a martyrdom for me. They fought bravely, and all the 300 fighters were murdered. They were buried at a place later called Sidi Uqba in Algeria, and a mosque was built at that place. Uqba's descendants are still found in the area, stretching from Lake Chad region to Mauritania's coast. The trans-Sahel Arab tribe of Kunta traces its origins to Uqba in Algeria, Tunisia, and Libya. Some of his descendants are known as Awlad Sidi Uqba. That is how Uqba bin Nafi radiallahu an sacrificed his life for the sake of Islam at the distant part of the world. Edward Gibbon, referring to Uqba bin Nafi as Aqba, gives him the title Conqueror of Africa, beginning his story when he marched from Damascus at the end of 10,000 of the bravest Arabs, and the genuine force of the Muslims was enlarged by the doubtful aid and conversion of many thousand barbarians. He then marched into North Africa. Gibbon continues, "It would be difficult, nor is it necessary, to trace the accurate line of the progress of Aqba. On the North African coast, the well-known titles of Bugia and Tangier define the more limits of the Saracen victories." Gibbon then tells the story of Aqba's conquest of the Roman province of Mauritania, Tingitana. The fearless Aqba plunged into the heart of the country, traversed the wilderness in which his successors erected the splendid capitals of Fez and Morocco, and at length penetrated to the verge of the Atlantic and the Great Desert. The career, though not the zeal, of Aqba was checked by the prospect of a boundless ocean. He spurred his horse into the waves and, raising his eyes to heaven, exclaimed, "Great God, if my course were not stopped by this sea, I would still go on to the unknown kingdoms of the West, preaching the unity of the holy name and putting to the sword the rebellious nations who worship other gods than Allah."